Let's go beyond the connection. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we have a very interesting conversation today with Michael Parlotto. Now, Michael, currently you are the VP of Emerging Technologies at InComm Payments. That doesn't necessarily describe, I think, everything that you do. You're the visionary, you're the innovator, you're looking at what's coming, you're assessing the future, and you're even called the smoke jumper internally. I'm going to let you explain a little bit about what that is. You're also very avid outdoorsman. You go mountain biking, competitions with mountain biking and hiking and kayaking and all kinds of different things. It's really incredible to have you on today because we very rarely get a chance to look into the future and understand what's happening. And the goal here is to navigate the hype. And one of the biggest areas of hype is AI. And we all know it's going to do phenomenal things, but you're down in the trenches, really understanding how is that going to impact our business. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do, I would love to just give you a chance to expand a little bit more on that introduction that I gave you.
Yeah, sure. I do work for InComm Payments. We are one of the largest payment networks behind the scenes. We have over 525,000 retail locations worldwide. And I am the VP of Emerging Technologies. And what that means is that I run our innovation center called Go Studio. And we are doing R&D research on emerging technologies. We also supply free services to our clients to help them determine what challenges they might be facing and what solutions we can come up with to help solve those challenges. And then we have a broad community outreach program as well, which includes events and many other things. But I also have many other hats within the organization. I help with M&A, doing IT evaluations of M&A opportunities, as well as mentioned, I'm called the smoke jumper because whenever there's a new thing, a fire, a challenge, that it has lots of question marks around it, I'm tapped on the shoulder as well as my team and asked to go solve or help figure out that particular challenge. And so keeps us very busy.
I can only imagine. And you're somebody that I'd want to have on the team. So I'm going to start out in a way that we think about AI and we think about the new technology. And we've all heard the term garbage in, garbage out. But the customer, their problems, the voice of the customer is some of the most important data that we have that we give into new technologies like AI. And I think it was McKinsey that talked about how a lot of the greatest innovations that have come over the past 100 years have come through the customer and solving their problems and talking to them. I'd love to just ask you, how do you think about customer problems and driving innovation internally?
Specifically for our team, for the Innovation Center, the customer focus is our number one priority. And right from the beginning, it was a pillar of all the work that we were doing. And so we built a 3-part process that we use with our clients and internally as well. Some of our internal teams use this same framework to be able to get to the root of what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And so we use a framework called problem framing, and that whether or not you know the problem or you don't know the problem, you can get to what the root problem is. And then you can prioritize that list of problems to get to what are the ones that are really the big bets that you're going to use to make progress and to meet the expectations of that particular customer. And then it goes from there into design thinking, which is an industry standard framework for solving that, whatever that problem is, coming up with ideas. We love to think of all the absurd and crazy ideas that you could come up with. That framework was developed by IDEO, another big innovation company, a number of years ago. And we use that framework to get to what the potential solution is. It's not necessarily have to be technical. It could be just what are the ideas? And then we start creating very low fidelity proof of concepts to show what the solution would actually be for that particular idea. And idea. It might be on paper, it might be using swizzle sticks and lollipops and spaghetti to develop whatever that proof of concept is. It's really just to get across how it should function. And then you can take that and increase the fidelity over time if it's the right direction for that particular customer. We will take it in front of the customer and actually have them walk through that experience. And then, assuming it gets to a point where it makes sense to commercialize it, you would go and take it and use commercial technologies to build that out. Once you get to the point that you have a particular product, the last part of that step is you don't want to be disintermediated by your competition within a week after you get that particular solution out into the market. And so we've developed a futures framework that it's not a crystal ball. It doesn't give us the answers, but what it does do is point out signals, and those signals can allude to where the future could be going to. And from there, then you can take action on protecting your particular product or service or solution from being disintermediated in a short amount of time.
A lot to unpack there. I'm going to ask from at the very beginning, you said something that was really intriguing. We all understand solving customer problems. And that's what we do as a business. Their challenges, that's what we do. We solve them. But then you said you've got a framework for then taking kind of the ideas, the strange, the wild, the crazy, everything, and attaching it to these problems. And that's something that I think most companies, we don't really do a good job at. We all heard it, the thinking outside of the box. Don't constrain yourself, those kind of things. You seem to have created a system, a framework for doing this. If there were just some tips that you could give for the audience that's listening here today, in terms of how do you bridge that gap? And I know that could be a 3-hour conversation, probably a 3-month like working session class. But if you could just give us some tips that get us down the road a little bit, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, one of the most important tips is getting diversity in the room. What you'll find with a lot of ideation, it tends to be 4 people in a room coming up with an idea and then pushing it down to either the customer or pushing it down to other people within their organization. The one thing that Go Studio does really well is that we bring people from all over the organization and outside the organization as well. So we have partnerships with whether it be service providers or vendors. Some of those people are some of the biggest names in the business. You can think of the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazon, those types of people. We have partnerships with university systems as well, and they bring a different perspective. It's important to get as many perspectives in the room as you possibly can, whether that be the customer perspectives or the people that are there trying to come up with the solution. You need as many perspectives as possible in the room because everyone brings their experience, brings all of their history, brings their usage of it, whether it be a device or a service, to the table. And all of that comes together to develop a better outcome at the end. And so that's the first thing. The second thing I would say, forget about the technology up front. Everyone jumps to providing the solution of the technology right out of the gate. And the technology is not the most important thing. It's actually getting to the root of the cause of the problem that you're trying to solve. And that could be a human factor, that could be a process factor. There could be so many different areas where those things come into play. It's more important to focus in on the actual problem and all the things that are around that problem. Mentally, I actually, in my own head, and I've had this since I was a kid, and people always chuckle about it, but like in my head, I mentally go through every department in the company or every component within a solution. And I'm like, okay, that piece I need to do this, or this piece I need to do this. You can bring people in from all of those components and have them provide their perspective on each one of those areas, which then comes back together when you get to creating a final solution. And the other thing is, don't say no. Don't be negative. The guy that says the crazy spaceship comment, may actually be the guy that brings the idea to help solve the challenge that you have, because his perspective is out in left field, and maybe he has no knowledge of the problem that you're trying to solve, but he has experience in a different area that may align with the answer that you're trying to hit. And so we say that up front while we're in the meeting. There's no, it's yes and. So when somebody says something, if you have a challenge or a problem about what they're saying, you yes end it. And that keeps the conversation going too, because you don't want to stifle somebody and say no. And then what do? They all crunch up and they won't continue answering the question. So those are the main three that I would say in an innovation center that are important.
So amazing, because we tend to get very insular thinking. We tend to think we've all come up in our careers because we're pretty smart people and we know what to do. And so we miss out on that voice of the customer. We miss out on that diversity. And I would put the last thing that you said there into like a cultural thing, that no problem or no idea is a bad idea. There's a term called psychological safety. And if you think you're gonna throw something out on the table that you're gonna get shot down for, what you're gonna do is you're just not gonna throw stuff out on the table,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And we want to prevent that from the beginning of starting our workshop preparation so that people feel safe in the environment to basically say almost anything.
Yep. Yep. Makes perfect sense. So I want to transition this to how you start digging in. And you talk about transforming user interactions. And you actually talk about using voice-based AI solutions in order to do that. So I'd love you to, if you could kind of unpack all that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. We, of course, have a lot of different ways in which we interact with the customer. We have e commerce solutions, we have mobile solutions, we have, of course, traditional websites, we have POS integrations, kiosks. There's so many ways that a customer interacts with our products as well as with other products that are out in the marketplace today. The challenge is making the product as simple as possible to get to whatever it is they're trying to do with your product. And one of the things is, and AI is an example of this, that when you start trying to use AI, right now, most of the interfaces that the media is talking about the most are require the customer to type in a prompt and get a response back. So it's response in, response out. As you said earlier, if it's a bad response in, you may never get the answer that you're hoping to get out of the AI. And we started looking at how voice could actually be used to help bridge the gap between the interface and the challenges that the customer are having with not getting the response that they wanted. We've actually created an AI chatbot that has voice integration, and it's tied to a healthcare platform. And it was specifically driven by the fact that healthcare is a difficult topic for anyone. Even going to the doctor is a difficult topic, understanding what they're saying and all those types of things. And so if you could create a voice interface and I could tell the system in my language, in my tone, in my perspective, and get an answer back, that would be a huge thing. It would be a help to the end consumer. It would get them, hopefully, get them to the results. And there's a lot more to this than just the voice. That's just another interface on the front end. There's all the architecture, the data, the training, all those things that have to go into it as well.
So what I love about that though is because one of the top reasons why AI fails is that we tend to, if we're interfacing with AI, and if our customers interfacing with an AI bot or wherever it is, the more information we can give, usually the better the outcome.
Yep.
And if we make somebody type into it versus if I can just talk into it, I'm going to give it a lot more information.
Yep, exactly. And there's been reports as of late that about 80% of companies out there are looking at integrating voice-based solutions into their products in the next couple years. It's not just specifically for AI, it could be mobile phone applications, it could be numerous other areas that you could use AI in that approach.
I'll have to say I'm a big voice user when I go out jogging. I probably leave myself messages, return messages, ask Perplexity a question. It's all voice. It's not only better input because it's more input, but it's a better user experience. It's an option for those that want to use that. It's a simpler option to do something better. And so you're increasing the CX value of that interaction. I think that's one of the big things. What I wanted to ask though is you mentioned in there's a lot of other things that go into it. And you started out a little bit ago saying there's so many different ways we get voice of the customer. It could be from that kiosk you talked about. It's the app. It's so many different places. One of the biggest things and the limitations of AI is when data is fragmented, it's siloed, right? So what would you, in terms of a recommendation here, say, like the level of importance of just bringing the right data together to make the most out of any AI application that we're trying to use as a business, but how important that data component is? How would you frame that?
Yeah, so it really depends on training the model. We have actually done projects where we internally thought that we needed hundreds of thousands of records of data to train this model to get to the answer that we needed. But through our partnerships with the university and PhD students and numerous other people, the quantity wasn't as important as the diversity of that data based off of the problem that you were trying to solve. And so we may be able to use less data if it's actually quality data that provides that diversity. For example, if you were using it for computer vision and you only had a picture of me and I'm looking straight at the camera and doing a particular thing, and all of a sudden I turn to the side, maybe it's not going to identify what I'm saying because it can't see my mouth fully, and so I need different data to be able to help train that particular use case, for example. That's just one type of scenario, but it's the same for many other use cases. It's, does the data show solve the actual challenge that you are trying to get to? The other thing is AI is improving so quickly over the last year that you don't have to have your data 100% clean any longer to be able to start the effort to get to a solution as well. And there used to be a time where everyone was like, oh, I got to get this data clean. It's got to be in a structured environment. It's got to be this way. It's got to be that way. But because of how quickly AI is maturing, some of that isn't needed because the solutions do the cleanup as part of the processing that it's doing behind the scenes. It's not that you need an enormous amount of data. Of course, the use case will drive that, and the off cases will drive that as well. But then also, again, the solution may be able to clean, you may have unstructured data, whether it's in documents or in some other form that the AI can read and integrate and then learn from it and use that in the output that it's providing.
You know, it's interesting. I don't think any of us got into business thinking we were going to be data experts, but now we're thinking about this stuff. And I like the way that you're framing it because just like diversity helped with the creativity and solving the problem to begin with, diversity is going to help create diverse and better quality output too. It's one of the big takeaways so far that I've had from our conversation.
We focus on diversity in every aspect of the work that we do. We don't want to bias anything that we are doing, whether it's a workshop or an AI model. And so by bringing in those people, by bringing in diverse data, it helps you keep on track.
Makes perfect sense. I want to move into an area that you talked about as invisible. And you're going to tell a story here that talks about specifically embedded finance powers and powering invisible network orchestration. Now that's a lot of big words. And what I'd love to do is for you to start out and just tell us the story of what that means, but also how that has a greater meaning for anybody that's listening today as well.
Yeah, so embedded finance is really taking the front ends that we were just talking about, those many front ends, whether it's kiosk, a website, a mobile application, or some other aspect, and incorporating generally through APIs, but there's other means. You could do batch processing or other way of integrating financial services into those applications. And a lot of the times, the company that's actually embedding the financial services is not a financial services company. They have some other service, but today payments are embedded into almost everything that you do. Whether you're buying something on TikTok and clicking a buy now button in there, or social media, or your car is another example. You could be driving down the road and buying something on your car interface today. And there's payments incorporated all of that. Now, those companies aren't payment providers. They don't necessarily have to know payments, but they need the payment component to be able to provide the end-to-end customer experience that they want to do. And so embedded finance is the technology solution that is the invisible piece behind the scenes that you provide those APIs to then integrate into those services. And InComm is the embedded finance provider. Most of what we do, you would not know who InComm Payments is unless you were in the business, because we're sort of like that Intel Inside reference where you don't know who we are. Our brand is not generally forward facing. It is an industry solution, and it's embedded into, as I mentioned, over 525 retail locations worldwide, and we provide many different APIs to be able to do that.
So, what I'd love to do is take this conversation now and put it in a under a framework of, now we're pitching this to a C-suite executive or a board member, where they're going to look and they're going to say, Michael, this is all great. I love the idea of diversification. I love the ideation. I love the creativity around it. I love the role of new technologies, emerging technologies like AI, but I want measurable outcomes. When I go to the board, they're not going to ask me about how my diversification of ideation is going. How do you focus this so that we can map the challenges up front from the customer to measurable outcomes? Because those are the starting and end points, and everything else we've been talking about is the important middle part.
Yep, exactly. And, that problem framework that we talked about early in the process, the last step in that process before you start ideating on the solutions is prioritizing the problem as far as how much of an impact is it going to make to your business bottom line. And that doesn't necessarily need to be financially in dollars and cents. Of course, boards tend to focus in on the dollars and cents, but it can also be customer satisfaction. It could be positive reviews. It can be more marketing capabilities. So getting press on your specific company or whatever, that really depends on what the central focus of that executive team's goals are. And that's part of the process, is identifying what their goal would be. And then you prioritize it against how easy or difficult it is to actually, solve that particular problem. That all ends up on a matrix of what are those big bets. And generally, we would take that to the board and executive team, to a business owner, and say, hey, here is what we've gotten back from you. And then from that point, we drive all the solutioning and development around making sure that you're solving that particular goal at the same time, still solving the customer's challenge at that point.
We got to think about it from all angles. So, we've covered so much territory here, and our poor brains, we can only remember about two or three things at a time. So, what I would love to do is, I'd love to ask you if there was one takeaway that you wanted today's audience, which is technology leaders at multiple levels, from chief technology officer down to VP manager level, what you would want them to take away from today's conversation, if there was one thing that you wanted to make sure that they remembered.
I think the biggest thing is finding the question marks in the challenge that, in their business. Because if they find the question marks, where are they having problems? Where is the customer having friction in the process? Where are you losing revenue potentially? And then from that, don't focus on the tech. First, focus on the problems and the situations that you're solving for and how your team can make that better. And in most cases, you may already have a technology sitting on the shelf that can solve that problem. It doesn't necessarily have to be an emerging technology. Everyone's focused on AI. We love AI. We have done 15 plus projects in AI, and we think that it's going to be a benefit. But if you jump directly to AI, you're going to miss the actual problem, and the customer may not even use whatever the solution that you develop is.
You know, I lied. There was one more question I wanted to ask, and that is that everything that we've talked about from the beginning, when you started talking about how many channels there were that we interact with our customers, the importance of CX, the customer experience, the delivery of these emerging technologies, existing technologies, our cloud applications that we all rely on, all of that has to go back and forth over our infrastructure, our network infrastructure. How important, as we're talking about all these emerging technologies and various channels to the market, for the technologists that are listening here today, how important has the actual network that we deliver this on and the resiliency of that network, how important is that infrastructure?
Definitely resilience is one of the key things that our customers are looking at a embedded finance solution provider to provide resilience, supportability, and all of that. As far as the network itself goes, again, there's a question mark on that based off of how the customer is going to interact. If you're putting a kiosk into a location that doesn't have network capabilities, then you may be looking at a IoT solution or an on the edge processing solution versus putting a network connection in for all of the activity. And we go through that process. We've done projects where of course, everything's in the cloud today, but there's still physical data centers for a lot of things. And so the hardware and having people to manage that, the networking capability, then you have the cloud, and then, okay, I've got all of those services, but is the customer going to be able to use the solution in the location that you need, whether that's a retail store, could be out in a forest somewhere, if you've got a mobile application and wireless service may not be available in that particular location. And so you have to think about what the customer's usage is and then look at, okay, do I need an offline mode to be able to process this? Do I need to have an on edge solution so that they can process stuff, gain some data, and then push it back up to the cloud at a later point? All of those things can come into play. We're actually working on a project right now that we're looking at offline to online. And so you're in a spot, you don't have connectivity that can then get it into the cloud once you get back to a wireless connection at a later point. So it's really interesting. We try and bring in all of our networking security as another key aspect of that, ensuring that with AI, you got a lot of data going back and forth and customer data in many cases, especially in the healthcare space. And so you got to look at the security of those networks and those connections and your applications as well to protect your customer also.
It seems, would your opinion be that, like, in the environments where you don't always know where the customer is going to be, you have applications yourself, kiosks is one example, where an Internet of Things, the proliferation of touch points and interaction points is doing nothing but growing exponentially. So hybrid environments, SD-WAN environments, multiple ISPs, failover. So you could have low orbit satellite for the forest. And is your opinion that those are the things that, as we solve for today's emerging technologies and bring these applications in, does that give a larger seat at the table for the technology experts that are building and maintaining our network infrastructure? It seems like that's a good takeaway.
Yeah, they definitely have to be part of the conversation. And you talked about low level satellites. That technology is, of course, out there. It's expanding, but it's emerging as well in and of itself. It's not 100%, as they would say right now. And so you need those experts that have the experience in those areas to be part of that diverse team when you're talking about that. Again, that same project that I was talking about offline to online, we were talking about the low level satellites as a potential solution to as the network backbone for that. And it's really interesting. A lot of learning experiences when you start digging into that.
I'll just have to say that I know there's going to be questions as a result of this. So I would love to make sure that we provide a link to your LinkedIn profile if that was appropriate.
Yeah, that'd be great. And also, I'd say Go Studio has a website and with a number of blog posts on many of the topics that we're talking about. We have a white paper out there for embedded finance if somebody's interested in that specific aspect. And follow our social media. We do a lot of events. One of the things that community outreach, innovation, community building is an important part of it. And we have 2 events per year. We just had one that is around AI 10 years into the future, and the recording will be up on YouTube. And feel free to communicate with us. We'd love to chat with people out there.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, because the mission of this podcast is to bring different ideas, different perspectives, different insights from our backgrounds. And you brought in just a wealth of information and knowledge for how we should be thinking about this. And if we all do that, it's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I felt like you were a tsunami of information today. Thank you very much for coming on, and just really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for the invite. It's been great talking with you. Appreciate it.